So picture this. I'm standing at the airport, bags packed, ready for a 10-day trip to Italy, when my parents cancel my ticket right in front of me, and not quietly. They sneer, lean in, and call me broke daughter. I mean, I'm stunned, frozen, and maybe a little furious. But here's the thing this moment. It's not the end. It's actually the beginning of something way bigger. And honestly, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. The fluorescent lights above the airport check-in counter hummed softly, a flat, sterile sound that kind of matched the emptiness I felt in my chest. I stood behind a mountain of designer luggage, and there they were, my parents commanding the space like they owned it, which, honestly, in a way, they did. At least in their minds. My father, Richard, was the first to approach the counter, his platinum credit card glinting as he slid it toward the attendant. At 65, every strand of his silver hair was perfectly in place, his blazer impossibly crisp, his posture so rigid it was almost comical. He didn't walk, he presided, he radiated the kind of authority that made everyone around him feel small. And sure enough, I shrank against my own simple carry-on, feeling like a beige sparrow in a flock of peacocks. Then there was my mother, Cynthia, perfectly coiffed, fussing over her reflection in her phone, like the moment itself was a runway and she was the star. "Oh, this is going to be divine," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Liam, my brother, gave a smirk that made my stomach twist. At 26, he was the golden child, our parents' favorite, a failed entrepreneur who lived off their endless funding and still somehow carried it like a badge of honor. He caught my eye across the luggage pile and tilted his head, that condescending little look that said, "Yep, we all know who the real loser is here." And, okay, yeah, I felt it. The shame. The humiliation, it crept up like ice in my veins. I just stood back, silent, letting them take center stage. The airline attendant, polite but oblivious to the storm brewing, began checking in my parents. "All set for Richard, Cynthia, and Liam," she said, sliding their passports back across the counter. And then, with a polite but hesitant look, she glanced at me. "And Fiona." My heart skipped. My hand trembled slightly as I stepped forward. "Yes, that's me," she typed quickly, brows knitting together. Then she looked up, apologetic, awkward. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I don't have an active ticket for you on this flight." What I managed, voice small, confused, disbelief lacing every word. This had to be a mistake. My father booked all the tickets together. It had to be Richard, of course. Sighed, theatrical, long-suffering, like I'd asked him to single-handedly solve world hunger. "Oh dear," he said, his tone sweet but sharp as a blade. "There was a change of plans." My mother and Liam flanked him instinctively, forming this united front that made my chest tighten. Change of plans. "What change of plans?" I asked, my voice growing smaller as the hum of the terminal seemed to magnify around me. People were starting to look over, but that didn't matter. The weight of their attention felt heavy, like sandbags pressing me down. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, the hint of a lecture creeping in. Your mother and I decided that your uncooperative attitude simply doesn't warrant a $10,000 vacation." Uncooperative. My words sounded strange to me, foreign in my own mouth. "What are you talking about?" Cynthia's voice, sharp as ice chips, chimed in. "You know exactly what, Fiona. We asked you for one simple thing. One, sign the papers to use the house as collateral for Liam's new business. It's for the family." I froze. The house, my house, the beautiful sprawling home my grandmother had left me, the place they'd been occupying while I was squeezed into the small, converted attic. I felt my stomach drop, nausea swirling up like I'd just been punched in the gut. "I told you," I said, voice hardening despite the shaking in my hands. I am not leveraging my grandmother's legacy for another one of Liam's can't-miss crypto art projects. It's too risky. Liam, of course, scoffed, gesturing as if I were a child. That's the attitude. Dad, too risky. She's so afraid of her own shadow. She's holding the entire family back. Richard's face remained composed, almost eerily calm. Exactly, he said. He picked up his passport and tucked it neatly into his blazer pocket. We are tired of your ingratitude. You live under our roof. I live in my house, I corrected him, voice dangerously quiet now. And you contribute nothing, he finished, cutting me off. You sit in that attic all day drawing on your computer, a digital artist who barely scrapes by. We are trying to build a family legacy, and you are a dead weight. The cruelty was so casual, so public, it felt like a physical blow. The attendant avoided eye contact, busying herself with forms. Passers-by stole glances. Curiosity painted across their faces. Said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the tension. You canceled my ticket? Just like that. We did, Cynthia confirmed, adjusting the strap of her Gucci bag with an air of finality. We're not financing a vacation for someone who actively sabotages this family. We're going to Italy. You are not. Richard leaned closer, the sneer sharpening. Have fun watching us leave, broke daughter, he whispered, each word calculated to wound. Maybe 10 days alone in that big empty house will give you time to reconsider your value. We'll be at the first-class lounge. They turned in unison, carrying their luggage like a parade of arrogance, and disappeared down the corridor. The words echoed in my head, heavy, designed to shatter me, broke daughter. The humiliation pressed down, tangible, suffocating. For a long moment, I just stood there, numb. The airport's hum seemed deafening, and then, clarity. It began slowly, the cold and precise kind I usually reserved for work. I wasn't helpless, not really. I turned to the attendant. Can you validate my parking? I asked, my voice steady despite the whirlwind inside me. I walked out, the automatic doors hissing shut, and as I stepped into the gray morning light, a laugh, small and genuine, escaped me. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. Hey, Mr. Henderson, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You won't believe the favor my family just did for me. I realized in that moment the betrayal, staggering as it was, had also created the perfect window for something big. My parents had made a catastrophic mistake, and the game was just beginning. I pulled into the driveway, the quiet of the house pressing around me like a heavy blanket. The streets were still, the neighborhood calm in that early morning haze. But inside me, my mind was anything but calm. My body ached from stress and the weird, creeping sickness that had started at the airport, and every step I took up the driveway felt heavier than the last. The house loomed large, familiar, and somehow foreign at the same time. I'd lived here all my life, yet today, alone. It felt like uncharted territory. I opened the front door, and the familiar scent of the place hit me, my mother's perfume lingering faintly in the air, my father's sandalwood trailing in echoes, a faint whisper of their presence. The formal living room gleamed, the kitchen pristine but sterile, the dining room's long table silent. The contrast between their grandeur and the emptiness around me made my chest tighten. It was my home, but for so long, it had felt more like a stage they owned, and I was just a prop. Today, it was mine. Finally mine. In a way I hadn't felt before. I trudged up to the attic, my sanctuary, my refuge, and collapsed onto the couch in the small living area I'd carved out for myself. The nausea I'd felt at the check-in counter hadn't gone away. If anything, it had sharpened into a strange, nauseous clarity. My fever was beginning to creep in. each muscle ache and headache somehow forcing my thoughts into a sort of focus. I sat there, sipping tea, wrapped in a blanket, letting the world slow down around me. And then, as I stared out the skylight at the gray sky, it hit me. The trust. Nana's trust. The birthday clause. My heart skipped, and for a second, I thought I might laugh, or maybe just cry. It was surreal, almost comical, that in the midst of this crushing betrayal, a window had opened. My parents thought they were in control. They thought they were punishing me, teaching me a lesson, asserting their dominance, and yet they had just handed me something far more powerful than any trip to Italy or lecture about family duty could ever offer. I pulled the trust documents from the drawer I kept tucked away, the ones I'd read 100 times but today were suddenly radiant with possibility. Nana had been meticulous. The house was an irrevocable trust. Yes, but with a birthday clause that would make me the sole irrevocable owner once I hit 30. That birthday, 5 days away, 5 days that coincided perfectly with my parents' 10-day Italian vacation. They had no idea. Or maybe they did and just didn't believe it would matter. Either way, they'd left me completely uninterrupted. The perfect window to act. The absurdity of it all made a small, dry laugh escape my lips. Here I was, sick, exhausted, humiliated, and yet a kind of cold, almost electric clarity began to settle over me. The humiliation wasn't the end. It wasn't even a setback. It was a setup. They had assumed that calling me broke, stranding me, and cutting me off from their carefully curated world would break me. They thought my silence, my modest life, and my so-called failures were weaknesses. But they had no idea. The joke was on them. The leverage, the advantage. It was all mine now. I sat back, letting the realization sink in. This wasn't just about a vacation anymore. It wasn't just about anger or revenge. It was about taking control, reclaiming what was mine, and exposing the cracks in their perfect little world. My fever, my fatigue, all of it faded slightly under this new, thrilling awareness. I could almost see the lines of strategy forming in my mind, the steps I would take, the careful precision required. It wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't going to rush blindly. This was a game of patience, observation, and timing, all things I had in spades. I leaned back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, yet calm, like a storm behind glass. I thought of the airport, the sneers, the words broke daughter, the way they'd turned their backs without a second glance. And then I thought of the birthday clause, the trust, the power that had been quietly waiting for me to claim it. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. They had thought they were leaving me with nothing. They had no idea they were giving me everything. The house was mine. The time was mine. And finally, after years of playing the invisible, the practical, the quiet child who didn't rock the boat, I had the leverage, the clarity, and the perfect opportunity to take back control. And in that moment, sick, tired, and oddly elated, I realized this was just the beginning, just the very beginning. Once the initial shock wore off and the quiet settled over the house, I let myself breathe. Finally, really breathe. Sitting in my attic suite, I opened the partition that hid the real me, the sophisticated setup I'd spent years building. 3 monitors glowed softly in the dim light. An organized command center where my hands moved with ease, fingers flying across keyboards. The reality, I wasn't a struggling digital artist scraping by on freelance gigs. I was a financial fraud investigator, and one of the best. I tracked multi-million-dollar digital thefts, untangled elaborate laundering schemes, and stared into the financial abyss that most people wouldn't dare peek at. And the crazy part, I'd been hiding it from my own family. Why? Well, because they treated money like a weapon, like a scoreboard. Everything was performance, status, image. My father, with his endless obsession over appearances, and my mother, so devoted to him, measured worth in numbers and possessions, not character or integrity. Nana, my grandmother, had seen it, understood it, and made sure I had a way to protect myself. Never let a bully know what you have, Fiona, she'd said when pressing the trust documents into my hands at 21, especially when that bully shared your last name. And so I cultivated a life that appeared modest, even struggling. A 10-year-old car, thrifted clothes, a small converted attic. I let them believe I was the broke daughter. It kept me safe. It was my armor. Now, alone in the house with my parents halfway across the world, the joke was mine. And, well, it was time to play it smart. I pulled up my work messenger, fingers trembling slightly, not with fear, but anticipation. The first step was to verify what I suspected my parents were reckless. And Liam, as always, was being funded blindly. I had emails, public filings, corporate documents, all the breadcrumbs. I dove in, meticulously cross-referencing every LLC Liam had registered, tracing addresses, verifying registered agents. Within minutes, I was untangling the mess he'd created, each discovery like a pulse of adrenaline. These companies weren't doing business. They were shell companies, moving money in circles, likely convincing my father it was legitimate reinvestment, when in reality, it was chaos. My stomach twisted as I thought of the maxed out credit cards I knew they had been racking up. Tens of thousands of dollars across 3 accounts. They hadn't just been living off the house, they had been actively gambling away their financial safety net, oblivious to consequences. Each number, each document, each falsified statement I uncovered sent a thrill through me, not the kind of thrill from revenge. Exactly. But the intoxicating clarity of control. I could see the patterns, the weak spots, the exact points where the system could be turned to my advantage. For the first time in years, I felt truly untouchable. The parents who had bullied, mocked, and humiliated me had no idea who they were really dealing with. The digital artist they discounted as fragile, naive, and dependent. That was just a mask. Behind it, I was a strategist, a professional with a precise, methodical mind honed over years of tracking fraud. And now, the stakes were intensely personal. I leaned back, the glow of the monitors painting my pale face, and smiled a small, cold smile. Liam's businesses, my father's financial oversights, the reckless reliance on the house, all of it was visible. All of it could be leveraged. They had believed my silence was weakness, that my modesty was failure. They had no idea I had been watching, analyzing, storing every scrap of evidence, ready for a moment like this. Every misstep, every shady transaction, every poorly documented loan, they'd left a trail straight to their own undoing. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I opened a soft credit check on my father, curiosity and anticipation coiling in my chest. Within moments, there it was, a new loan, taken out 3 months ago for $250,000. Business loan, applicant listed as Vance Innovations, LLC, CEO Liam, CFO Richard Vance. Collateral, my grandmother's art collection. My heart skipped. Not only had they gambled recklessly, but they had used assets that weren't legally theirs. I leaned back, a shiver running down my spine. This was wire fraud, bank fraud, serious, federal-level offenses, and they were completely blind to it. Completely blind. I let out a dry laugh. My parents had thought they were orchestrating a power move at the airport. They'd striven to humiliate me, to assert control, to make me feel powerless. Instead, they'd exposed themselves, creating the perfect storm for me to reclaim what was mine. The sick feeling in my body began to ebb, replaced by a sharp focus, a calculated excitement. Every document I pulled up, every filing I cross-referenced, every discrepancy I found strengthened the web of leverage I was constructing. I thought of Liam, blissfully unaware in some lounge in Italy, thinking the family's money and resources were endless. My father, confident in his control, had no clue that his obsession with appearances, with control, had blinded him to the consequences. And me, I had the inside view, the data, the evidence, and, most importantly, the timing, the trust, the birthday clause, 5 days, 10 days until they returned, the perfect, uninterrupted window to act. I stretched, leaning back against the chair, letting the hum of the monitors lull me into a sort of tactical trance. My mind raced with plans, possibilities, sequences of action, all organized with precision. I didn't need to rush. The house, the assets, the law, they were all aligned, waiting for me to claim them. The thrill of control, of finally seeing the scope of my own power, was almost dizzying. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was directing, strategizing, orchestrating, and it felt incredible. A part of me still remembered the airport, the sneer, the words, broke daughter, the condescension dripping from every glance. But now, I could see it differently. That moment of humiliation. It was the catalyst. It had forced the clarity I needed, the focus, the absolute understanding of the game. The mask of failure I'd worn for years had become armor, and now it was going to become a weapon. I took a deep breath, the first truly calm one in hours, and allowed myself a smirk. They had made a mistake, a big one, and I had all the pieces I needed. They had assumed my silence was weakness. They had assumed my modest life was powerless. They had no idea I wasn't broke. I wasn't helpless. I was, finally, untouchable. And the game had only just begun. And in that quiet, attic-lit room, I began to plot, methodically and confidently, the next moves that would finally give me control of my own life, my own home, and my own destiny. The morning after my parents left for Italy, I woke up still feeling the remnants of the fever that had pinned me to my couch for days. But now, instead of weakness, I felt a strange, electric focus. Every ache in my body seemed to sharpen my awareness. I knew exactly what I had to do. First, I grabbed my phone and called Mr. and Henderson, my lawyer. His voice was cautious, skeptical even. When I explained the situation, Fiona, he said, "It's Sunday. Are you sure this can wait?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice steady despite the sick feeling still lingering. "We can't wait. My father committed bank fraud using my assets. The house, the trust, it's all timing. I need to act now." He understood immediately. Within the hour, he was pulling up in his car, briefcase in hand, expression grim. I walked him through everything I'd discovered: Liam's shell companies, the maxed out credit cards, the fraudulent loan using my grandmother's art as collateral. As I spoke, I could see the gears turning in his mind. He adjusted his glasses, nodded, and began outlining the steps. Eviction notices, restraining orders, and proper documentation were first on the list. Every word he spoke sounded like music, confirming that my plan could move forward exactly as I imagined. Next came the movers. But not your standard moving company. I needed precision, discretion, and efficiency. I'd already contacted a high-end art transport service and an estate sale team. First, the art. Each piece my grandmother had left me, from delicate mid-century paintings to rare collectibles, had to be removed without risk. The professionals arrived promptly, white gloves, careful hands, and methodical movements. I watched them, a mix of awe and satisfaction settling over me as they carefully packed each painting into climate-controlled crates. This wasn't just about physical assets. It was about reclaiming my grandmother's legacy, protecting it from the reckless hands of those who thought they could exploit it. While they worked on the art, I coordinated with the estate sale company. Everything my parents had brought into the house, their designer clothes, furniture, trophies, and all the little symbols of their status needed to be cataloged, photographed, and prepared for either sale or removal. I gave instructions clearly, calmly, the words flowing naturally as if I'd done this 1,000 times before. Each directive, each phone call was a small victory, a tangible assertion of control that I'd never felt before in this house. The legal documents came next. Mr. Henderson handed me envelopes containing the eviction notices and restraining orders. I went over each one carefully, making sure the language was precise, ironclad. I had to anticipate every possible objection, every attempt at manipulation from my parents and Liam. The restraining orders were clear. They were legally barred from entering the property within 500 feet. The eviction notices cited the fraudulent loan, the financial malfeasance, and the unauthorized use of assets. The wording was deliberate, each phrase calculated to prevent them from finding loopholes. I felt a thrill run through me. Every document, every signature, every notarized stamp was a step in reclaiming what was mine. The bank, of course, had to be informed. I called the corporate fraud department, crisp, professional, and calm, laying out the situation as clearly as possible. Hello, this is Fiona Vance. I need to report a significant case of collateral fraud regarding loan number. My voice was steady, firm, carrying the weight of authority that only comes from knowing every fact, every number, every filing. As I spoke, I felt the tension ease slightly. The bank would act. They had protocols, investigations, auditors, legal teams. They couldn't ignore this, and I knew, thanks to my profession, that once they were involved, my parents' maneuverings would unravel quickly. By mid-morning, the house was a flurry of organized chaos. Movers transporting paintings, estate sales staff cataloging and boxing items, Mr. Henderson reviewing final legal documents. I moved through it all like a conductor, orchestrating the chaos with calm precision. At one point, I paused to take a deep breath, leaning against the stair railing of the attic. The scale of it all was almost dizzying. But then I reminded myself why I was doing this. It wasn't just revenge. It was justice. It was reclaiming control from the people who had never respected it. I checked the trust documents again, confirming the birthday clause and the irrevocable transfer that would take effect the moment I turned 30. That timing had given me the leverage, the uninterrupted window to act decisively. My parents had believed their absence was a gift to themselves, a 10-day escape while leaving me stranded. They had no idea they were also leaving me the perfect strategic opportunity to assert my authority over the house, over the assets, and over them. As the day wore on, I made sure every step was documented, photographs of packed items, notes of phone calls, time-stamped emails to movers and legal teams. Every action was recorded, a digital paper trail that would leave no room for dispute. I double-checked the list of art pieces, confirming serial numbers, condition reports, and storage vault arrangements. Each movement was precise, intentional, reinforcing the feeling of total control that was finally mine. The first 3 days were a blur of this meticulous activity. The fever had fully subsided, leaving behind clarity and a sharp sense of purpose. By day 3, the house was practically empty of everything my parents had brought in. The art safely transported to a secure vault, and the estate sale company had finished tagging and preparing the remaining valuables for temporary storage or sale. Every task completed was a tangible marker of progress, a small victory against years of condescension and control. Throughout it all, I stayed in constant communication with Mr. Henderson. Every question, every confirmation, every new piece of information about the fraudulent loan or the bank's involvement was discussed and analyzed in real time. He advised, I executed. The synergy was effortless. I could see the impending panic of my parents, though they had no idea it was coming. Each phone call, each movement of the movers and estate sale team, each legal action was a calculated step toward absolute reclamation. I even monitored my family remotely, briefly unblocking numbers to track their attempts at contact, only to let calls go unanswered, texts unread. Each failed attempt at manipulation or coercion reinforced the narrative I'd carefully constructed. The broke, invisible daughter had become the orchestrator, the strategic mind behind every action. The irony was delicious. The airport sneer, the humiliation, the words broke daughter, all of it was fuel now, powering a controlled, meticulous response that they could neither anticipate nor counter. By the end of the week, the house was a well-oiled machine of planning and execution. Movers had removed every piece of furniture, every personal belonging, every designer item. Estate sale teams had cataloged and prepared everything for storage. The bank was actively investigating the fraudulent loan, ensuring that my parents and Liam couldn't access any of it. Mr. Henderson had finalized the eviction and restraining orders, ready to serve them the moment they returned. The strategic advantage I had gained from timing, knowledge, and professional expertise had transformed what could have been a moment of vulnerability into a decisive, unassailable position. Every action felt deliberate, purposeful, and satisfying. Each decision carried weight, but it was the weight I wanted, the power I had long been denied. The stress of the last months, the condescension, the orchestrated humiliation, all of it had been a prelude to this moment, and I moved through it with focus and clarity. The thrill wasn't just in seeing the house cleared or the assets secured. It was in the knowledge that my parents' own recklessness and arrogance had provided the leverage I needed. They had thought they were punishing me, isolating me, and instead, they had enabled me to reclaim and protect everything that was mine, legally and irrevocably. And so, with the house increasingly empty, the art secured, the legal framework established, and the bank on high alert, I finally allowed myself a moment of pause. I sat in the attic, surveying the work done, mentally ticking off every task completed, every piece of evidence gathered, every step in the plan executed. The tension in my body eased slightly, replaced by the sharp, satisfying edge of control. I was no longer a pawn. I was the player, and every move I had made, every careful, calculated decision had set the stage for the ultimate outcome. The house was mine, the assets protected, and the law firmly on my side. The rest was just a matter of timing, patience, and watching my parents' impending return unfold exactly as I had orchestrated. The taxi's engine rumbled up the long driveway, and I could hear it before I saw it, the familiar sound of arrival. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, calm, the new set of keys glinting in my hand. Beside me, Frank, the process server, sipped his coffee with that bored, unreadable expression he always wore. I watched as the car finally stopped and the back door opened. My father was the first to step out, his expensive travel suit wrinkled, the careful composure he'd perfected over decades undone in an instant. His gaze flicked to the massive red and white for sale sign planted firmly in the manicured lawn. Confusion spread across his face, quickly morphing into panic. What is that?" Cynthia's voice shrilled, sharp and high-pitched, as she stumbled out of the taxi, dragging her carry-on behind her. Liam followed, slower, still adjusting to the sudden shock, his smirk nowhere to be found. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I simply lifted the keys a fraction higher, letting the sun catch them, making them gleam. "It's the sale sign," I said calmly, voice carrying easily across the front yard. "The house is for sale." My father's jaw dropped, his eyes narrowing, the familiar sneer gone, replaced by something thinner, more fragile panic. "Fiona, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, stepping toward me. I shrugged casually, like a gesture that could have been entirely idle. "You're not allowed on this property," I said, keeping my voice even, almost conversational. "You're trespassing." He stopped mid-step, confusion written in every line of his face. "This is my house," he barked, his voice rising, cracking with disbelief and rage. "No," I said, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "It's mine. The trust dissolved 5 days ago, and the property is legally, irrevocably mine. You are not allowed here." Cynthia's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth as if to physically catch the words. "Fiona, darling, this isn't real," she whispered, the voice trembling. "Liam, ever the fool, tried to push past my father, striding forward as if sheer bravado could override the law. She's bluffing," he muttered. "She wouldn't dare." I didn't flinch. Not at all. "The locks have been changed," I said simply, gesturing toward the sturdy front door. "This is Frank," I continued, nodding toward the process server. "He's delivering the eviction and restraining notices." Frank stepped forward, expression neutral, and handed my father a manila envelope. My father stared at it, frozen, like he had never anticipated this. "You've been served," Frank said plainly, dropping the envelope at his feet when Richard refused to take it. Cynthia and Liam hesitated, then slowly took their own envelopes. Their hands shook as they opened them, eyes scanning the documents, growing wider with every line. "A restraining order, an eviction notice." Cynthia's voice trembled, high and incredulous. "What does this mean?" "It means," I said, voice calm, almost gentle now, "you have to leave. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me or this property. Everything you brought in, all your designer clothes, furniture, trophies, and bric-a-brac, it's either in storage or being sold. You have no access." Liam's mouth opened, then closed. His face twisted between anger and the dawning recognition of helplessness. "Wait, what about our stuff?" he asked finally, his voice cracking. "Your stuff?" I asked, as if tasting the word for the first time. "The designer clothes, the Art Deco furniture, the souvenirs from a lifetime of excess. It's all safe, in a storage unit, paid for by me, for 30 days. After that, the bill is yours." Cynthia let out a sound, almost a wounded animal cry, and sank to her knees on the pavement, hands clutching her suitcase. I watched, coldly, as the carefully cultivated persona of elegance and control collapsed in an instant. Liam stood rooted to the driveway, staring at the house, the sale sign, the empty windows, all the trappings of their arrogance removed. My father's face went pale, the first signs of fear creeping in. "But where will we go?" Liam whispered, vulnerability creeping into his voice for the first time. He looked exactly like a 26-year-old child suddenly realizing that life doesn't come with a bailout. I shook my head slowly, letting the words wake in. "You froze the accounts," I said, voice soft, casual, matter of fact. "That wasn't me. That was the bank's fraud department. They are very interested in discussing that $250,000 loan, the one you secured with my art. It's bank fraud and wire fraud, by the way." Federal offenses. Richard staggered, pointing a trembling finger at me. You did this? His voice cracked, disbelief and terror mingling into a sound I had never heard before. I shrugged, letting a small smile slide across my face. No, Dad, you and Liam did this. You gambled with assets you didn't legally own, and it's all coming back to you. Cynthia's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Richard, what is she talking about? My father's eyes darted around, grasping at some explanation, some loophole, but there was none. He stammered, a weak, desperate voice emerging. It's a misunderstanding. Clerical error? No. Dad, I said, voice firm, cold as steel now. Calm, but undeniable. It's fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud. You used my grandmother's assets to secure a loan without my consent. They've been moved to a secure vault. Everything is documented. You can't touch it. I stepped closer to the window, allowing them to see the driveway, the empty house, the looming sale sign. Happy birthday, I said casually, letting the words linger. The birthday clause dissolved the trust. I am the sole, irrevocable owner. The house is mine. Everything inside is under my control. And yes, the law backs me up. Richard looked as though he might collapse. The fight completely drained from him. For the first time in decades, the arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by hollow panic. His hand twitched, reaching, grasping for something, anything. But there was nothing to hold. He understood finally, fully, that their meticulous control, their careful performance, had crumbled in the face of timing, law, and my own preparation. Cynthia whimpered, clutching Liam, as he stared silently, mouth agape, absorbing the fact that the world he had relied on, family money, status, power, was evaporating before him. This wasn't a punishment, it was a revelation. The realization hit them like a physical wave. They had played their hand, and I had anticipated, documented, and neutralized every move. I let a pause stretch between us, the silence heavy, charged, triumphant without a word of gloating. Then, quietly, I walked into the house, locking the door behind me. The silence that followed was profound, almost sacred. The tension, the years of humiliation, the sneers, the mockery, they all culminated in this one moment of reversal, of power reclaimed. The taxi pulled away. The driveway, once a stage for their arrogance, was now just a road leading away from the emptiness they had created for themselves. I stood at the window, looking down at the yard, the sale sign planted proudly, the house empty and secure, and felt a calm, deep satisfaction. Finally, the house, the assets, and my life were mine, free from manipulation, free from control, free from the weight of their condescension. It was complete. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt truly, unapologetically powerful. Months later, everything had settled into a rhythm, and for the first time in years, I felt the kind of peace I hadn't known was possible. The legal battles had run their course with efficiency I could almost admire. Mr. Henderson, as always, had been thorough, leaving no room for loopholes or games. My parents had tried to fight, filing frivolous lawsuits, claiming undue influence over my grandmother and questioning the trust's validity. It was laughable, really. But I let the courts handle it. The judge dismissed everything in a single hearing, citing the airtight documents and my grandmother's signed affidavit of mental competence. There was no room for argument. The law was on my side. And it was satisfying in a quiet, almost serene way. The bank investigation into the fraudulent loan was swift, faced with an avalanche of evidence photos of the art, the forged appraisal, The fake P&L statements for Vance Innovations LLC. My parents had no choice but to face consequences. Richard, my father, had pleaded guilty to wire and bank fraud, taking responsibility for the largest portion of the scheme. Liam's charges were reduced to a misdemeanor and probation. A humbling first experience with real accountability. My mother, having built her identity entirely around my father and the house, had collapsed into a small apartment, surviving on the forced sale of her jewelry. They had all faced the fall that their reckless ambition and greed had earned them. I remember sitting in the empty house after the movers had taken the last of the furniture, the hardwood floors gleaming, the windows sparkling in the late afternoon sun. It was no longer theirs. It wasn't a battleground or a stage for status and cruelty. It was just a house. Mine, empty, valuable, and silent in a way that was both comforting and profound. The objects that had once symbolized their control, the designer clothes, the trophies, the ostentatious furniture, were gone, moved to secure storage, awaiting sale or redistribution. The estate was professionally cataloged, each piece accounted for, every transaction above board. The law, and my meticulous planning, had transformed chaos into order. I settled into the attic for the first time without tension pressing down on me. I could look around, finally relax, and breathe in a space that had been my refuge but was now completely, wholly mine. I made a small meal, sat by the window, and let the quiet envelop me. There was satisfaction, yes, but it wasn't gloating. It was relief, closure, and a rare sense of empowerment that came from reclaiming control over a situation that had been manipulated for years. For the first time, I was living according to my own rules, in my own space, without interference, without manipulation. I reflected on the journey, the sneer at the airport, the humiliation, the words "broke daughter," and I realized, with a strange calm, that those moments had been catalysts. They had pushed me into clarity, forced me to act decisively, and given me a rare opportunity to assert agency over my life. The moment of cruelty had been transformed into empowerment. What had been intended as punishment became the very lever that allowed me to reclaim independence. It was ironic, yes, but also profoundly satisfying. I had turned their cruelty into strategy, their arrogance into leverage. With the house empty and my legal position unassailable, I made choices for myself for the first time without needing approval, without a second-guessing glance over my shoulder. I sold the house quickly, less than 24 hours on the market, the high demand for the property ensuring a price well above asking. The proceeds, combined with my personal savings, allowed me to leave the city entirely, to reinvent my life without baggage, without the weight of a past defined by someone else's expectations. I moved to a small coastal town, a place where no one knew my name, a place where my past didn't follow me. I found a modest, beautiful home overlooking the ocean. The simplicity was restorative, the view was healing. I kept the paintings my grandmother had left me, moving them into a sunlit studio where I could appreciate them, finally, without fear of interference. And I returned to digital art not as a ruse, not as a cover, but as a genuine hobby, a creative outlet that was mine and mine alone. I still worked as a fraud investigator, leading a team, teaching seminars on financial forensics, but now I could do it on my own terms, without hiding, without performing. I had created a life of quiet stability, of real independence, free from the tyranny of condescension and manipulation. Sometimes I think back to that day at the airport, the casual cruelty of my father's words, "broke daughter." He meant it as a final, definitive judgment, a condemnation. But he was wrong. In that moment, they didn't curse me. They released me. They cut the last frayed rope that had tied me to a life dictated by others' expectations, a life constrained by guilt, by obligation, by manipulation. They thought they were taking everything from me, leaving me stranded and powerless. They had no idea they were finally giving me everything I had ever wanted: control, independence, and the freedom to live authentically. The aftermath was calm, structured, and most importantly, mine. The legal dust settled, the bank investigation closed in my favor, and the house sold. My parents' brief attempts at correspondence letters from my mother, plaintive messages from Liam went unanswered. They had lost, and there was nothing to be done about it. I didn't gloat. I didn't relish in vengeance. I simply moved forward. I had reclaimed what was mine, protected my grandmother's legacy, and ensured that no one could ever manipulate or control me in the same way again. Now, years later, the life I lead is quiet, fulfilling, and fully my own. I wake up to the sound of the ocean, not the hum of fluorescent lights or the condescension of a family obsessed with appearances. I spend mornings in my studio, afternoons with work that I love and find challenging, and evenings reflecting on how far I've come. My grandmother's paintings hang where I can see them, reminders of wisdom, strategy, and resilience. I live modestly, not out of fear, but out of preference, savoring the simplicity and the autonomy that I fought so hard to achieve. The transformation from that humiliating airport moment to the life I have now is something I think about often. Every step, every decision, every carefully considered action was informed by patience, strategy, and an understanding of power. The sneer that was meant to anchor me, the label of broke daughter, became the fuel for a calculated reclaiming of agency. I had been underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed for years. And in the end, that underestimation became the very tool that allowed me to secure my independence and thrive. In reflection, I see that the narrative wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about punishment, it was about reclamation. It was about taking control of my story, protecting what was rightfully mine, and building a life that was defined entirely by me. I had turned what could have been a moment of crushing defeat into a victory of strategy, patience, and foresight. And in that, I found not just satisfaction, but profound freedom. The kind that can only come from knowing that you have navigated the storm, emerged unbroken, and reclaimed your life fully. From that crushing moment at the airport, labeled broke daughter, to reclaiming her house, protecting her grandmother's legacy, and finally living life on her own terms. This journey shows the power of strategy, patience, and self-belief. It's a story of turning humiliation into empowerment and chaos into clarity. If stories like this spark your curiosity, make sure to stay tuned for more real-life tales where ordinary people take control and rewrite the rules of their own lives.